Hello everybody and welcome to GameGuru MAX live broadcast number 95. And before I even utter my first sentence, I just want to make sure that everyone who's tuned in, thank you very much, they can hear me okay. And that means we have to do the perfunctory sound check. So I know there is a delay, about 17 to 19 seconds, that's fine. And I'm happy to ramble on for the next 17 to 19 seconds. Hopefully, YouTube have improved the situation and it's less seconds. And as soon as everyone says, yes, Lee, we can hear you, then I can carry on with the format of our broadcast. Okay, first person in was Rick V. Thank you very much, Rick. And quickly followed by Tom. So great, so you can hear me. So whatever I say next is not wasted to the ethos of, sorry, not the ethos, what's that other thing? Yeah, that. Okay, so this broadcast is split equally into two parts. It is a demo and the second part is a Q&A. Here's the thing though, it's not always a demo. Sometimes we get to do what's called a how-to. We get to show you something. Not necessarily a demo that someone's created, but something in the software that you can see and say, oh, that's how it works. That's what we're going to do this week. We're going to do a how-to, but the second part, as always, is a Q&A. That's where you get to ask your questions. Poor old Lee gets to answer them. Now, the format for that is you can ask your questions anytime you like. Just stick a question mark at the end so we can find them in the live chat really quickly. And you can do that immediately. You can start asking your questions right now. What's going to happen is I know for a fact there are at least 2 TGC team members on hand right now, live. At least Rick and Zach is going to read those questions and remember them. If those questions cannot be answered during the, in quotes, demo, then I will be happy to answer them in the Q&A session. And both Rick and Zach will repost those questions so I get a chance to see them and so they do not get ignored. So the sooner you have a question and post it, the more likely it is that you're going to get your question answered. So with all of that preamble out of the way, and do please let me know in the comments if you feel all of that could be done in some video recording before I actually start speaking. Let me know, because I imagine that would save some time because we can edit it to listen to Lee ramble on. So without further ado, let's go into the first part, which is the demo. You can see my screen, you can hear me, everything is hunky-dory. And so I'm going to drop you into one of my temporary projects, which is creatively called Hello. But I'm not going to go into any levels I've created. What I am going to do is to create something new. And in support of the competition we recently launched on Friday, what I'm going to talk about, my how-to if you will, is the importation of Heightmaps. It's quite an intricate subject. It's certainly not something you can just drag and drop and suddenly get instantaneously what you want. It is borderline technical, and so what I want to do in this broadcast is just cover some of the basics, just some of the simple stuff that I take for granted, but you may not necessarily know. So how do we start this lovely journey? Well, it starts by creating a new level. Now remember, you can import something from the past, or you can create something new in GameGuru MAX. And you do that by doing add new level. So when we click that, we get this. This is a new level. But at this point, it's completely empty. It's a void. But when we click it, what happens? We go to our terrain generator. And we've covered this in previous broadcasts. We've certainly covered it in a built-in tutorial within the software. But this ain't all you can do. In the last 2 weeks, sorry I can't exactly remember the date, we released a new built-in tutorial which talked about the importation of Heightmaps. You may not have seen it. It went in with a lot of other fixes and tweaks and additions. But I thought it would be a great opportunity, whilst the competition is in full flow, to show you a little bit more about Heightmaps, what I think about it, where I might get my data from. And from that, maybe it gives you inspiration or some ideas and you can take whatever it is that you've got in your head a stage further. So let's have a play. Let's have a play with Heightmaps. So I've already ticked this one on. You'll see it in the built-in tutorial if you want to, like a course on what am I talking about. Just go to the GameGuru MAX built-in tutorials in the hub and look for importing Heightmaps or Heightmap importing. And the first thing it asks you to do is tick this one on, advanced settings. So you tick this on, you get all these lovely things. These are optional, I must admit. These are optional. The ones that you absolutely need is this one at the bottom. Choose Heightmap raw file. Before I click anything, before I do anything with the software, I need to give you some, it's called a prerequisite, because you need to know something about Heightmap. So what is a Heightmap? Heightmap is a very simple file that contains only one kind of data, a height value given a particular set of dimensions on the width and the length. And the height is the data that you're interested in. So for a given width and height, you have a big chunk of data. Sorry, for the given width and length, you're given a big chunk of data to describe the height. Now that is extremely arbitrary, it certainly is. And it was designed that way to be generic. But the upshot is, these height map files can actually contain geographical or topological information, which means it can describe the Grand Canyon, Snowdon, the mountains of Scotland, anything that you think has height, you know, hills, valleys, plains, anything that has a height can be represented with this data. And we built into our terrain generator the ability to load in those files, these completely arbitrary, people making it up as they go along files, and convert it into the topography of your terrain. We still have procedural generation underneath, but you can impose your own height field within the terrain generator that we give you. On screen right now you see a little yellow box. Can you imagine inserting your own topography into that yellow box? For the rest of the box, for outside the box, for on to infinity, you're not going to import an infinite height field, but certainly within the area that you want your game to be based, your level to be played, sure, within the yellow rectangle is perfectly acceptable. So let me show you how to populate this area with your own height field, what all of this advanced settings mean. Hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a better clue how to use the feature, where to get to the stuff, and hopefully as a basis to start from, you can actually start building your games and your levels based on realistic landscapes, not something that you've made out of dumpy hills, but something you've found, imported, and is now part of your level. A lot more convincing. Think about it, nature is a better teacher than something that you just did by raising lumps of hills here, there and everywhere. This is nature over tens of thousands of millions and gazillions of years to form this terrain. So without further ado, you see my screen, you can see it from the top to the bottom. You're familiar with this, certainly choosing your biome, and we will certainly visit some of these, but the first thing I want to start you off with is this button here. It's called Choose Heightmap Raw File, and it implies you already have a file. Now if you're struggling to find a file that you can specify with this button, simplest thing to look for is Heightmaps or height fields. Type that on Google, look for those, you will certainly find them in BMP format, JPEG format, PNG format, etc. Those are fine and dandy, and those are 8-bit. BMP, JPEG, PNG, 8-bit formats. So they will store a value from 0 to 255, which defines the resolution of the height. What does that mean? It means there is only 256 possible heights in your topography. So imagine the ground is 0 and the highest of the highest mountains in the world is 255. And you only have 256 steps between 0 and 255. And that defines your resolution. Horrible, I know. And that's because it's 8-bit. 8-bit only has those 0 to 255 differences. When you extend yourself to say 16-bit, which you'll recognize not as a JPEG or as a PNG or as a BMP, but as a .raw. Now, .raw could be literally anything. Anyone who defines their file as a .raw, well, they don't have any rules. They can put whatever they want inside that file. But as a general rule, and certainly the files that we found on the Tinterwebs with the .raw label, they are 16-bit. What does that mean? What's the difference between 8 and 16? Oh, it's double. No. No. If it was an 8-bit versus a 9-bit, I'd agree with you. It doubles the amount of resolution you got. To go from 8-bit to 16-bit, the resolution, the fidelity that you get in your height data is exponential, quite literally. So if you were looking for height data that you want to make a topography out of, prefer your .raw as opposed to your .jpegs, PNGs and .bmps. But I digress. You tuned in to watch a demo, so let me do that. I apologise, but this is one of those kind of subjects. And maybe next week everyone wants to just see Lee play another game demo, and that's fine. So let me go through it for you. Choose Heightmap raw file. I'm already narrowed in on a set of files that I found on the Tinterwebs. Again, just look for raw Heightmap data, raw Heightmap fields, raw Heightmap files in the BMP, JPEG, etc. I'm going to start with this one because it's the one I'm most familiar with. British 4096.jpg. Some of you might already have figured out what that file name denotes. JPEG, which means it's 8-bit. If it's 8-bit, don't worry about big endian and little endian. And why do I say that? Go on Google and look up endianness. It's a weird word, but what it means is, what order should we treat the bytes within a value larger than a byte? So, for example, after a byte, it's a word. After a word, it's a D word. And after a word, it's a double D word. Or there's other versions of it. What it means is, was the first byte the most significant set of values or the least significant set of values? Big rule of thumb, most computers work on little endian format. Certain exports work on big endian format. But that's because of architecture decisions. That's not about what file that you managed to find. If the file was created in an ART package that preferred exporting files over 8-bit in big endian, they will export it in big endian. What does all that mean? Before I get into showing you this spiky version of the UK, which I'm familiar with, let me just show you an example. If I just select little endian, which most modern computers would probably prefer, and I select this one, the Grand Canyon.raw, which isn't an 8-bit, it's a 16-bit file, and this is what you get. A big pinprick of landscape. Why is it? This doesn't look like the Grand Canyon, at least not one I visited recently, maybe on another planet. Reason? It's about the order in which those bytes have been interpreted during the import process. If I just selected it big endian, yeah, I know, not everybody uses it, but again, it's about what the tool exported the file in. Try big endian and do it again. Grand Canyon. Ta-da! Yes, see what I mean? It suddenly looks a bit more canyony. This is a very powerful tool, especially if you're importing some raw format that you're not familiar who created it or what format they used. Just toggle between these two and then try your import again. It will save you a lot of worry and time about spikes and things. So whilst I'm on this subject, if I just zoom out a little bit, I'm going to play around with some of these values. I'll explain them a little bit later, but if I just drop that one down here, so, and then click generate, see what happened just then? Before I click the generate button, I only got this. This is the pure Heightmap data that was imported. And that's fine. If you locate your level somewhere in the middle and you can never get out of the valley, that would be a game and it'd be great. But what if you manage to scramble to the top? Suddenly you find yourself with this, well, the end of the world, basically, beyond EV Dragons. Well, we added this tick box, which allows you to add some more terrain. That, thanks to, you know, the procedural system that we already have in place in GameGuru MAX, it will go on forever. Now, there is an editable area. You'll notice a little rectangle. It's still trying to say, please make your level inside here. There's only so much memory this computer has. But beyond the height map, you can also go on forever. And you could probably walk that, but you can't really make a game out of walking for 15 gazillion miles. And so that's what this tick box is. Generate terrain outside. Extends the terrain, not using the height field, because you ran out of that. It goes back to the procedural system. But you can see the procedural system has some problems. It doesn't know where the height field ended. And so it's going to just generate its own terrain. And that's where these other values come in. The idea that you can create a fade. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm making sure that I'm going to remember the last value of the height field. I'm going to blend it slowly into the procedural stuff, or at least it doesn't look like a big cutoff. And there's a sort of explanation that after that, you then wander off into raggedy hills off in the distance. And let's face it, into fiction. At this point, it's all fact. This is height data pulled from a satellite. After that line, yeah, it all goes into completely procedural fiction. And so that's what big endian, little endian, the generate and the fade value actually does. This one underneath, it's a drop down of the likely sizes of the file you're going to import. But don't worry too much about that. As you've seen, it's already set it to 4096 because as part of the function of loading in the file has extra information, including its width and height. And so it pulls that and it can create that here. We just happen to be on 4096, so that's what it kept. If you chose a different height map, which is different width and height, it would adjust this and call it custom. And that's the end of what I would call the advanced settings for importing height maps. It's not super complicated, but you get the idea of why each thing is was exposed to the advanced settings, so you can at least create all the variations that you might want when you're importing a height map. But I digress. That's not really what I want to show you. That was just about all of these settings are required if you're pulling in some random raw file. What if you were just pulling regular old 8-bit, which is the British 4096.jpg, which is what this looks like. Now, anyone who's visited Blighty will probably agree it don't look like some spiky pincushion, which is what this looks like right now. And so there's a couple of things we can do about it. First thing is we get rid of this whole experiment, which is horrible. Let's get rid of level 11 by, that was just for our benefit. Let's start a new one. So level 11, this is what you're normally used to, choose your biome, etc. We're not. What we're going to do is to select this one. It's a JPEG. It's an 8-bit height field. Remember before I was saying 0 to 255, not much resolution, but I think we can do something out of this. So I'll go through the process. Right now, even if you lived in the UK, do you recognise it? Maybe a little? Probably not. It's too spiky, and where do we start? So the first thing I would recommend when you're importing something that you're familiar with is go straight to the top, editable area size. And what happens is it changes the camera position, puts it right up here. Obviously above the cloud line, we're quite high now, but can you recognise some of the bits? No, that's fine as well. If you still can't recognise from a top-down view what your height field represents, the next thing to look at is Heightmaps scale. Now scale is basically going to squash your X and Z axes so you can see the picture from above. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to increase the scale. Now, anyone who's used to Google, you probably now recognise the UK. Now, I did some quick researches before this broadcast. Now, our editable area it maxes out at 3 miles on each axis. So 3 miles north, south, 3 miles east and west. And I managed to figure out that the width of the UK, including Ireland, is 300 miles. So we're not too far off, 300.11 and then there. So I've just set it up so it's basically an area of 3 miles, but the actual height map I imported is 300 miles. So you could argue that now we are 100 times shrinked to the actual miles. And so we can change the height map scale, and what this does is, remember, the resolution respects the original source material. The only thing that we're doing, and we're messing about with the X and Z in order to squeeze it into our editable area. So if 3 miles is what we see now, and that scale was set at 0.85, if we multiplied the overall scale by 100, which obviously divides this by 100, it would become 0.0085. And as we have a minimum cap of 0.01, which is close enough to 0.0085, we are now left with this. And what is this? Well, this is actually 3 miles of the UK, and it's placed as, well, I don't know where. Remember, the original height field was enormous. So where the smeg are we? So let's remember 0.01. That's the most closest to actual miles. You know, realism. But hey, we're doing game development here. Realism isn't number one. So let's just pull out. We pull out by increasing the scale. So we start to see where we are. Right? It looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, get rid of the cloud layer. Ain't that Scotland? Yes. So we got Wales down there, we got Ireland to the left. This looks like southern Scotland. How do I know? Because I rehearsed this broadcast, so you get a quality experience. And so, as to prove that, here is here is the UK. This is England, this bit is Wales, that's all of that is Ireland, and here, in the top, is Scotland. And I say southern Scotland because you see these little bumps, bump, 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 that's southern Scotland. Been there many times, lovely place. So you now have a general idea of what it looks like. And if you go back to the software, can you match it up now? Ireland, there's Wales, England. See this little blob here and this blob, blah, 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 blah. So we literally landed on, zoom a little bit more. We're kind of in the estuary here. And there you go, boom. I already happen to know the towns and villages around this area. As I said, I've visited a few times. But that proves this height map is genuine, and the height map is also facing north-south. It's always good to check that your height map is aligned to some compass directions. Otherwise, this process gets a little bit more difficult. So now we have, and I must admit right away, this is, remember, it's an 8-bit resolution. What does that mean? You only have 256 stages from the lowest of the lowest level to the highest of the highest level, which is that point there. That's not much resolutions compared to 16-bit. So if anyone says, would you prefer an 8-bit height map or a 16-bit .raw file to topological height map? Choose the 16-bit .raw format every single time. But I digress. First thing I want to do, now we're in the rainforest biome, I'm going to get rid of all the trees. Let's just focus on the land. There you go, a little bit better. Again, I can't confess, this is exactly what the UK looks like. Bit too pointy right now. But the only reason it looks pointy is because we artificially scaled up the height map scale so we can see where we are. Now we know where we are, which, if I zoom into... This is Google Earth, by the way. I think it was in this estuary, and the centre of import was about here. So yeah, I'd say this twisty, turny estuary ends about there. That's probably where we are. So now we know that, let's get back to what we said before, which was a more accurate scale of 0.01, which places us just about here. Wonderful. So now, believe it or not, obviously we're dealing with decimals and things, but this is pretty accurate in terms of X, Y, and Z scaling for the height map of that JPEG we just imported. I can see the sea over there, some hills, some distant hills, and a nice lumpy hill there. Can we reproduce that if we go into... Remember, Google Earth, unlike Google Maps, is three-dimensional. So if I click on where I think we are and hold down the middle button, switch round, see what we got from this vantage point. Looks like we got the sea over there, which I think there's the sea over there. We swing this way a bit. There's some lumpy hills. Swing this way a bit. Got some lumpy hills. Swing this way a bit. Big hills. Swing this way a bit. Big hills. Swing a bit more. Some distant hills. So hopefully that is a convincing statement that where we are right now is actually real world location, real world map, hopefully to the correct scale. So before I move on to the next bit, I know I'm really rambling on right now, but this is one of those technical subjects. They don't call them how-tos for nothing. I think we've covered everything. Get rid of the trees. We don't have palm trees in the UK. Make sure advanced settings are switched on. You understand the use of the scale, the big endian, little endian for 16 and 32-bit formats or greater. The fact that you can extend your terrain outside of the designated data that you imported as the height field. The fade value of how you blend into that procedural terrain. And of course, how big the file was in the first place. And I'm quite happy with all those settings. It looks like that hill and those distant hills kind of respect that hill and these hills, so I'm kind of happy with that. That's a good scale. So I'm going to click this one, generate terrain, and open the level editor. Let's call it Scotland Wigtown. Why do I call it that? Because I've been there. So we save that, we drop in, we press the start marker, and we're in the prehistoric. No one's built any roads yet, and there's the sea over there. Those are little dumpy hills, and there's a really big hill. And it's actually it's not exactly to scale, but remember, guys and gals, this is a computer game. It doesn't have to be accurate. But I'm standing now and running around basically Google Earth with that hill over there, those hills over in the distance, and everything else, at least roughly, topographically to scale. And from there, you can then build whatever it is you want. It could be a walking tour, it could be an actual game. Maybe you just want to use some rough definition of a landscape before you start building your fantasy and your fictions. But if you wanted to, and you was, going to the nth degree, making sure your accuracy was right, you could recreate real places in the world. Just get a Heightmap. .raw file is better. Use the import Heightmap feature. Make sure your scale is as close as you can get. If you feel the scale isn't good enough, and GameGuru MAX can improve if we add in another decimal point, let us know. We'll happily add that. So hopefully that is a good little tour of the import Heightmap. It's something we was really excited about, but really didn't have a lot of time to present when we launched GameGuru MAX on the 25th of March. We had a lot of other things to talk about, and this is one that just snuck past. So I'm happy to talk about it today in today's broadcast. Now, looking at the clock, I have really outdone myself. Why do I say that? In 95 broadcasts, I have never spent over 30 minutes talking about a single subject. But really, I suppose that is the introduction to software developers. But I do want to go on to part B, which is answering your questions. I imagine even the TGC team at this point have gone home. I am pleased to see in the early chat that both Rick and Zach was joining us to answer your questions in the meantime. But as I do not know which questions were answered, I'm going to start with the question I see right at the bottom of this live chat. And for the sake of expedience, I'm not going to spend too much time. So hopefully you got your questions in earlier, or you fire them off right now in case you get them in before we literally run out of time. And so we will start with Scott Castle. Can you populate zombies with a script? In translation, can you have a script that spawns zombies at random? Yes and no. You can't create a new zombie out of thin air, but what you can do is hide a zombie or a group of zombies and then have a script to show them, to spawn them into the level at that point. They can't spawn out of thin air or respawn after you've killed them, but a brand new zombie that you've temporarily hidden can be revealed quite easily with the visual logic system. So yes, you can do that, but you can't create a gazillion zombies through some zombie generator. That's something we're going to look at when we move on to the RPG mechanics. We would want to spawn an infinite number of creatures out of what's called a generator. But more on that in the future. These are some questions that were asked before, but no answers were prevailing. From Zach Judges, thank you very much. Any news about GG Classic? GG Classic at the moment is going to continue to fix all the bugs reported. And we've been fixing them for well over a year now. Any bug that got reported, we fix. And we have managed to get a 0 count on literally most of the updates that we put out for GameGuru Classic. If you do have a bug, post it on the issues board. We will fix it. And we fix them 4 times a year. But in addition to that, we are looking to expand some of the features of GameGuru Classic. More on that in future announcements. But if you are adamant that you're happy with GameGuru Classic, and that's fine, it's a great game maker, and you want to continue or finish your game project, we are here to support you, not just with bug fixes, but features here and there. But if there's something that you're really passionate about, please do put it on the issues board. Otherwise, we don't know what it is that you want for GameGuru Classic. Here's another question from Zach. Will any of these Heightmap files be included in the next update? No, and for a very good reason. Most of them are probably copyright. The ones we've managed to get hold of are from dubious sources. What I mean by that is I don't know where they came from. All I know is they're height fields or the .raw files. But who created them? Did they take them from Google data and convert them and then give them to us? We can't use that. We have no, what's the word? The chain of evidence on where that data comes from. Very happy to include height data if we know where it came from, but that's the problem right now. Remember, satellites gather this data. We don't own satellites at TGC, so it's a long chain of evidence from that data to something that we can include in a commercial product. But there's plenty of places out there you can get Heightmaps, and fewer places we can get actual 16 or 32-bit raw data, which is even better. So if you find great places, please let us know and we'll post them so the rest of the GameGuru MAX community can dive in and get a great source of information. It'd be great if you could just export the data directly from Google Earth, but that's not available commercially right now, only in academic circles. Here's another question. So when will we get better rain, snow and underwater effects and a day and night cycle? Thank you. Yeah, probably 2 of the most largest requests from GameGuru Classic in many years. We already have rain and snow and underwater, even the underwater effect. But I think the question is, when do we get better rain and snow and underwater? Right now it's a bit of a fudge, it's a bit of a shader trick. What we really want to do with rain and snow is use the particle system that's been built into GameGuru MAX. That gives you a lot more particles and a lot more control over the particles. And there are some demos already being done in the community which hint at how we can use those particles to great effect. I've already seen things like sugar stealers and atmospheric detritus looking really good. So with a small few tweaks, we got rain and snow. The third thing about underwater, yeah, we have added swimming recently, which I think was important so everyone doesn't drown since you're trying to go through a river. But yeah, we do want to do a lot more on the underwater in terms of the vegetation. We've already got a bit of fish animal life, but also effects, visuals, bubbles, all the accoutrements you want if you want an underwater gameplay adventure. So those are still to come. We've really just covered the surface right now. So please bear with us on those 2 things. Next question is from Chalos. Can we get an ETA for the RPG implementation? There is no ETA. There's no fixed date that you can then bash us over the head with when we completely miss it. But I'll tell you one thing. We are working on a game kit that really introduces some introduction elements of the RPG mechanics. You've seen it in previous broadcasts if you tuned into all of them. It's called the Aztec Game Kit. So when you see that pop up on Steam or non-Steam, check it out, because there's a few little elements that kind of have a little gentle nod to the RPG game mechanic. When we actually do it in full force, yes, a lot more things will happen. Inventories, crafting, conversation trees. But if you're not patient for all of that in a future release, then check out the Aztec Game Kit, because there's a couple of things. Generally, things like melee and treasure, things like that you might want to check out, just to sort of wet your whistle before you get full-blown RPG implementation. Another question, can you give us an estimate of the release of... Oh, so that's the same question as the one above. Chelos and DLJ Lee might be the same person. Only joking. Next question, this is from Tom. When you start adding VR support, will you allow people to test it? Always. Anyone who's in the know knows that on Steam we have a special branch called the experimental branch. We release versions onto that experimental branch up to 5 days before everybody else gets it in the public domain. All you need to do, if you're interested in submitting proper bug reports to us, is let us know and we'll give you the key. You'll be able to get into that branch, test it. The only thing we ask, and it's not a rule, it's just a request, that if you do see something in that early version of the build, please let us know via the issues board, so then we have an opportunity to fix it, test it, make sure it's right before we make it part of the public build. That's all we really ask. But yes, you can actually get an early look into that. And if you were waiting for VR, again, you'll get to see VR before everyone else, at least by 5 days. So please check that out. It's called the experimental build on Steam. Here's a question from Zorgo33. Will it be possible to add icons on any interactions? That includes comma, ladders, doors, collecting items, not talking about physics, grab items, etc. Question. Add icons onto interactions. I'm going to interpret that question as, and it's something I've been thinking about because I've played a few games recently. Instead of just running up to an item and you have to switch it on or off, or operate it, or fix it, you just have to press E and it's instantaneous. What if you could press, an E, but you have to hold it down for 10 seconds, and if you're interrupted because of combat or something, you don't get the full 10 seconds, and then you got to go and fight your way through more enemies, and then get back to the thing, switch or a button, and then continue for a full 10 seconds. You would need icons for that. It can't just be a text on the screen. You'd have to have a little circle, with the circle filling in slowly for over the 10 seconds. So something like that I have been thinking about, and I'm just waiting for enough people, enough weight on that idea to say, look, we really, really need it now. Pressing E to instantaneously do a thing is no longer sufficient. So yeah, if there's more requests in that area, it's not difficult. It's just something that we do need to see that a lot of people want over other things, and then it obviously gets bumped up in priority. Here's a question from Zareth Fewings. Is there a ETA for custom characters or parts? Our own parts rather than the ones character creator, and custom weapons that were mentioned previously. Custom weapons, it's an exciting area. That's the one we've been working on right now for certain reasons. We are actually working on a new weapon system that separates the hands from the weapon itself. The single biggest benefit of that is you can swap out the hands from a male to a female to an alien to a wolf to whatever hands that you want. It also means you can swap out the weapon part. You can change an iron part to a bat, to a club, to a stick, to a spear, to whatever it is you want. That single, simple thing totally revolutionised how our weapon system would work. And we thought, well, while we're at it, why can't we allow people to create their own weapons? Take a weapon, change the size, change the texture, change the model, change the settings, and you've made your own weapon. This is what we're thinking about right now. Obviously, it's baby steps. It'll take a while to fully mature, but I think it's a great idea. It suddenly customises a large number of pixels on your game screen if you see your own customised weapon waving around everywhere you run. As to creating custom character parts, that kind of already has been happening with our artists, but they have like secret, dark, inner knowledge. What we are planning to do is what's called a technical article, which not only gives you a step-by-step guide how to create them, but we're going to give you template files to get you started. So you don't have to start completely from scratch, and all you're really going to do is follow the instructions, use the template files, create your first, say, dummy character part, and then embellish it and change the model, change the textures, change whatever you want, and then you can create your own additional parts. It's still early days as to can we take those parts and make them part of the official collection or give them to the community. I suppose in the early days it will be just for your game, but I'm thinking down the road, if they are fully compatible with Max, eventually we can make them and make them available, if not through official means, through community sharing these parts with the rest of the community. So yeah, both those points we are seriously considering, because it is where we kind of stop and then the community take over and create all the rest of the things, which I think makes a lot of sense. There's only a handful of us, but there's lots more of you. So yeah, we have been thinking about this quite a lot. So I'm looking at the clock. I think we've broke a record, guys and gals. 44 minutes in. I don't think I've paused for breath. And we still have many more questions. But unfortunately, I am aware of certain rules. One of them is YouTube states that no one listens to a video for over 44 minutes. And that's a fact. So I'm afraid we have to stop there. If you remember your question, please ask them again next Wednesday at 7 p.m. GMT. Thank you for showing up and joining us in the live chat, and I hope you've enjoyed all the things we've been revealing and all of the answers I've presented in the second half. So until next Wednesday at 7 p.m. GMT, I shall say thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.